Well, good morning, everybody. After that ridiculous comment. So we are continuing our series on living in the middle, and we're talking about, the middle is the tension that we feel because there's a lot of tension. I got to tell you, I think we're all probably where Mark is in the sense that we're ready for the elections to be over and just a lot of tension around that. So when Adam or whoever is doing the video is done with it, they put it on Dropbox, which is like a cloud-based storage. And all you can see is this tiny little thumbnail on Dropbox. And so I happened to see, I uploaded my slides, and I saw this thumbnail of Adam with a red hat and white letters. And I was like, what is he doing? We're trying to keep this thing together. So I double-clicked and saw Buckeye Nation. I was like, okay, we're good. But that's where we're at, where it's like, it's incredible that I could just see a red hat and think, oh no, here we go. And so I thought, the best way to start the topic today is to talk a little bit about pronouns. They, them. Isn't it crazy that I could say the word pronouns and they, them, and everybody gets nervous? Like, that's just nuts to me, because I think about, like, when I was in high school, so, 30 years ago, if I heard the word at my high school, pronouns, or they, them, I'd get a sick feeling in my stomach for a very different reason. It's because I was probably in Spanish class, and we were conjugating verbs based on pronouns and gender. And now pronouns have become another almost trigger word. And then the idea of they, them, think about how the words they, them is thrown around. They are out to ruin this country. They are a threat to your democracy. They are eating the cats and dogs. They are doing all kinds of things. They, them. And we all have our they, them. And we hear all the accusations about they, them. And so what I want you to do as we launch today, because we're going to talk about dealing with the deep-seated frustration and anger that we all have towards certain groups of people. I want you to think about who's your they. Is it Republicans? Is it Democrats? Is it an individual? Is it a politician? Is it a transgender? Who is your they that you want to correct or get rid of? Who's your they that boils your blood and every time you see a picture, every time you hear the news article or read the headline? Who's your they? And what I want to do is I want to look at Jesus, our example, and what he has to say about how we deal with them. And I believe that this is going to be a good reminder for us over the next couple weeks and beyond, especially as things come to a boiling point. But this is something that it's not unique to this season. We always have our they, them that we put a lot of our own frustration toward. So this is a good old-fashioned talk about loving your enemies. All right, so I want to start. Again, we're looking at the example of Jesus, but you got to have your they, them in mind. That people group, that person. Interesting story. This is in Luke chapter 9. With your they, them in mind. As the time approached for Jesus to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead, who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Now, there are a lot of they, them, racial undertones in this, and I'm going to try to set it up for you. So, Samaria, and that was some of the different words and people groups in here would have cued the ancient audience on to exactly what this is about. So, Samaria and Samaritans were a variant, and please believe the best about the words that I choose here, because I'm not trying to get myself into racial trouble. I'm just want to give you the information in this to understand this story. All right, Samaria and Samaritans, and then you had Jerusalem representing Jews in the purest sense in terms of bloodline. So Jews and Samaritans did not like each other. The Jews represented a people group, a race, and a faith that had kept themselves within. They did not marry or mix with other cultures in terms of the bloodline. And then Samaritans did. Back in the days of their exile, they had mixed with other cultures, and in the idea of the ancient Jew, had polluted the bloodline of the people of God. So Jews did not associate with Samaritans. You didn't walk through Samaria, you walked around Samaria, even if it had days to your journey. And Samaritans didn't like Jews either, because most people don't like to be not liked by somebody. And so you get this thing where they didn't want Jesus to come to them because he was on his way to Jerusalem, and they didn't like that. And Jews didn't like Samaritans already, so there's that. And the Samaritans did not welcome Jesus, and you get this situation where two of the big three, James and John, Peter, James, and John were the big three. They were the highest of the disciples. James and John, two of the big three, looked to Jesus and said, "Do you want us to smoke these people? Do you want us to just go scorched earth, smoking hole in the ground that was Samaria, because they're rejecting you?" And what did Jesus do? He rebuked the disciples. Now, what's interesting in this story is that Jesus had already been rejected plenty by his own people. In fact, there were Jewish cities who tried to lynch Jesus, and it did not provoke this kind of thinking from the disciples in terms of calling fire down from heaven. So they're not trying to nuke their own people, but these Samaritans, And what I think we can see here is this tendency we have to pick and choose our enemies. And I think what's really happening here is that because these Jewish disciples had some things in common, they could look down on these Samaritans who had done some things that they hadn't done. It wasn't their struggle. And so they could kind of unite in their self-righteousness and look down pretty heavily on the Samaritans, and sort of you have like this synergy of rage toward this people group who have this problem that they don't have. And I look at that, and I because we pick and choose our sins. We all do. And so often we will unite around with other people like us who don't struggle with certain things or aren't like certain people, and they're the problem. And we overlook a lot of the things over here and focus all our energy over here. And I think that's one of the things that James and John are doing, because they didn't have that kind of rage for their own kind. But what I want you to see is the example of Jesus, who rebukes the thought of calling down fire from heaven on his enemies? Because Jesus is motivated by love. The engine of response and opinion from Jesus is motivated by truth, obviously, but also in deeper. The foundation is love. And we're going to see that. And so for us, when we start to feel the blood boil about them, we need to ask ourselves, what's the engine? Where's the motivation? Is it really that we love them and we just want what's best for them? Because we kid ourselves sometimes. They need truth because I love them and I'm loving them by trying to, but a lot of times that's not really it. Especially in the case of the disciples, where we just as soon fire from heaven come down and blast them off the planet. All right, let's look at the next example. And this is the example of Jesus himself. His teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Now, a couple points here. Number one, we love our enemies. We love our enemies, but Jesus takes it a little further. He says God sends sun and rain on the just and the unjust, on the righteous and the unrighteous. Now, we tend to associate rain with, like rain wrecks our day at the beach. But in an agricultural society, sun and rain were essential. Sun and rain were blessings. So what Jesus is saying here is God blesses the good and the bad. Love your enemy because God does. Love your enemy, pray for your enemy, bless your enemy because God sends his blessing on the good and the bad. So first of all, Jesus says, love. The engine is love. Love your enemy, pray and bless your enemies, but the neat thing is the backdrop here, because this is taking place on the Sea of Galilee. And they know pretty much where this would have taken place. And so if you're the shore and my back is to the Sea of Galilee, over my shoulder, as you look at me teach, or as you're looking at Jesus teaching, is Tiberias. And Tiberias was a very unwelcomed city in that it represented Roman occupation. And there's very little we can do to relate with just how hated the Romans were. We'd have to picture one of our country's enemies taking us over and walking in our midst as rulers over us to come up with the concept of just how hated these Romans were. So when Jesus says, love your enemy, they're able to look out over his shoulder and see Tiberias. Or they could have looked up to their right at the Arabelle Cliffs and saw the Roman soldiers looking down, watching their every move. And it's in that context that Jesus says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, just like God sends blessings to the righteous and the unrighteous. And Jesus says this because he's motivated. The foundational energy was love for people. Now we're going to see this play out a few years later. This is Luke 23. Two other men, both criminals, also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, Golgotha, they crucified him there, along with the criminals on his right and the other on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Jesus, those same Romans, had arrested him, beaten him, spit on him, mocked him, harassed and humiliated him, and now were driving nails into his arms and feet, hoisting up the cross to kill him. And Jesus prayed for God to forgive them based on their ignorance of the moment. Father, forgive them. That's our example. So Jesus tells people, love your enemy and bless those and pray for those who persecute you. And he goes on to show us to the level that he's talking about, because he is praying for forgiveness for his enemies as they are killing him. That's our example. That's a pretty humbling concept, isn't it? Like the next time you're watching the news and you see your they and all that they're doing, and you think, man, Jesus said, love them, pray for them, and he demonstrated it to the level that while he was being crucified by them, he's praying for their forgiveness. All right, now, let's take a look at the other end. When is it okay to confront? When is it okay to speak truth and correct? Because there's a case study here in John chapter 8, and I think it lays it out. This is what it looks like when the engine is love. This is what it looks like to speak truth into the life of people who maybe don't think and agree, think the same way you do, agree with the things that you feel are right. Okay? So here we go. At dawn, Jesus appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery, dead to rights. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you. Go now and leave your life of sin." This becomes a pretty good case study for us for all this, because was there a clear right and wrong, or was this just a whole thing, the matter of an opinion? There was a clear right and wrong. Right? Adultery is a pretty well-established right and wrong. Now, it's interesting that only one of it takes two, but only one was drugged before the group, but she was still in the wrong. And it's clear that there is a clear right and a clear wrong. Jesus didn't just say, no big deal. But let's look at the motives for the accusers. Were the accusers motivated by love for this woman, wanting for her to leave her life of sin and turn to God? No. They were trying to trap Jesus. And also, if you want somebody to leave their life of sin and turn to God, killing them is probably not going to, establish repentance. So their motives are all messed up. Jesus' motives are pure. He loves her and he wants to help her. So what happens in the story is that Jesus defends her. He serves her by defending her and protecting her. He risks something for her. He risks his own reputation, maybe even his own life, his standing with the community. And he does this over and again, where he risks his own reputation to help and serve those people. And he demonstrates his love for her, and he protects her, and he serves her. And then, when it's just him and her in private, then, first of all, he forgives her. He says, I don't condemn you. I'm not judging you. Then, when she knows she's loved and protected, and it's been clearly demonstrated, then he says, now, leave your life of sin. Because he's in a position to make a difference. Because he's trusted now. She knows that he cares for her. And my point is this, the engine for Jesus was love. That was the motive. That's why he had an opinion in the first place, because he genuinely loved the person. And his love for the person transcended his love for anything else. It transcended his love for truth. It transcended his love for his country, his people. His love for the person won. And it drove everything. Now, for Jesus, this whole encounter took place in maybe 15 minutes. For us, it's probably going to take a lot longer. And it's not going to happen in the Facebook comment section. No matter how savage that meme we have or that comment we have, it's not going to do the job. And it's probably not driven by love or a genuine desire to see anybody turn towards something better. We just want to be mean. We want to be right. We want to be justified. We want to feel better about ourselves. That's where it comes from me. Because I love to troll. I have a blast. It's not a good thing. It's not motivated out of love. I may say, it's how I show love. It's not. It's sport. So we see this demonstration from Jesus. It's motivated by love. And it leads him to serve and protect. And so one good thing to ask is, you got your clear they, them in mind. Do you have deep friendships with people in that they, them thing? And it's going to be through those deep friendships where you love them and serve them that builds the kind of trust that might enable you. Maybe God will use you to bring somebody along. But it's not going to come as an outsider. It's going to have to come through loving friendship, servanthood, sacrifice. And that's what it's going to take also to see clearly enough to know what your motives are for even wanting it. All right, I'm going to invite the band up. I have one last thing. Maybe some of you are beside yourself right now because you know deep down that the world is never going to be void of they, them. The problems aren't going away. And some of you are all torn up for all the right reasons. Like, you're not out to just troll, and you're not necessarily crusading for the truth. Your they, them is all the people raging about they, them. I want to read to you from 2 Peter. Like, if you're all torn up and just so frustrated right now because of the way certain people are acting or thinking or the threat that they represent, 2 Peter 1, 3 through 4 says, His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. Through these, He has given us His very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, which is love, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. No matter what they are up to, no matter what they do to this country, the Scriptures promise that you have everything you need to live a godly life, which includes peace and joy. So you don't got to get rid of them. You don't got to fix them. You can still find joy and peace if you build your life on the foundation of God's love for you. That's the piece that makes it all work. The foundation for everything with God is His love for you and for them. And when we are centered in that foundational piece, God's love for all of us, it gives us a foundation to build a life of joy and peace that can never be threatened by anything out there. So cling to that as you move forward, especially through these next few weeks. Would you stand?